And now for something completely machinima.
Tracy Harwood. So I've done a little bit of digging around and I've discovered.
Ricky Grove. Fog comes in on little cat feet.
Phil Rice. This is the best film that I've seen all year and maybe ever.
Damien Valentine. Use the machinima, Luke. Hello, and welcome to another episode of And Now for Something Completely Machinima. I'm Damien Valentine, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, Tracy Harwood, Ricky Grove.
Hey, baby.
And of course, Phil Rice.
Hey there.
This week, we've got another interesting film, and it's yours, Phil. So what have you chosen?
Yeah, so I want to thank the YouTube algorithm for this one because I'm not exactly sure how it ended up in my feed. This is called Ridiculous Ties, made by someone named Finzlow. It was made about 9 months ago, and my understanding is that this was made in Blender, but made by extracting the actual Half-Life 1 models. I know at least the character models, that's the case. The sets look very authentic to the game as well. So everything ultimately was animated and done in Blender. But it's very faithful to the Half-Life 1 aesthetic. I'm assuming that's a stylistic choice. I mean, this could have been made with, less boxy models and whatnot. But the whole point of this is that it's set within that world. Most of the audio, I would say 95% of the audio clips that we'll hear are actual audio snippets of things that are, audio from the original game.
Right.
There's a couple instances where the scientists yell some things that I know for a fact are not part of the game.
They used AI voice recreation for that.
I don't know that for a fact. Is that a fact?
Yeah, it's credited in the video.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it makes sense because they blend perfectly in. They've got plenty of samples there to create a nice clone. So that's a neat use of that tech, I think. Anyway, the story basically it follows kind of this, I want to call it like an alternate universe version of Gordon Freeman going into the lab, taking part in this experiment, and then things go horribly strange and wrong.
Marx Brothers type of wrong.
Yes, it's like Marx Brothers with like Quentin Tarantino levels of violence. Basically marry those two ideas together. I found it mesmerizing. I'm a huge fan of that whole franchise, and I have particular fondness for that first game and memories of playing that first game, even though it does not hold up to the story depth that they did in Half-Life 2. But I just love that original game. Maybe it's just the context in which I originally experienced it. I've played it through so many times. So, just about every line that was repurposed for the dialogue in here, I would have these flashes of scenes where I saw that used. Sometimes they would reuse those samples for a scientist. You encounter the same scientists throughout the whole facility as you're escaping. They all have the same voice or same couple voices, and these same sayings. Valve was very clever with the way they originally implemented those, where there was kind of a randomness to the way that they would be triggered, and they created these audio snippets in such a way that they could be pieced together any number of different ways to create this very absurd yet strangely plausible dialogue between these NPCs, way ahead of its time for doing something like that. I'd never seen a game do that prior to that.
Because what it did is it made you feel like these were real people who you were engaging with, like a novel.
Yes. Complaining about banal things like we all would, right? So this seats itself within that. I'm particularly familiar with these audio clips because, okay, so this will betray how old I am, but basically in my earliest days of machinima and right around when this game first came out, there were other games that were kind of, out of the Quake explosion that came up. And one of those games was called Kingpin. And Kingpin was a game that was set in like a very urban setting, and it was, I think, banned in some countries, or it got a lot of controversy because every other word was effing this, effing that, and just tons of all the NPCs. Picture the Half-Life scientists, but they're all just, cursing like it's good.
Cursing a blue streak, yeah.
Right. And there was a website that I followed at the time that was, I guess you would consider it a blog before that term was used, called Old Man Murray. And it was this satire news site, gaming satire news site, with really, really good writers and talented. And to satirize what Kingpin had done, they extracted all the audio files from Kingpin and then edited together all of the instances of cuss words with no repeats. And put it and then released it as an MP3 for the community. And it's about a 3-minute long thing, and it's just nothing but the cuss words. And it was beautifully done to illustrate the absurdity of how over the top it was. Well, around that same time period was when a lot of the talk of, I think that the old legend of being able to watch The Wizard of Oz while listening to Dark Side of the Moon, and there's this strange synchronicity between the audio of that and the video from the film. Well, it was that had long been legendary, but now it was the internet era, and there were actually ways to do that digitally and share the experience of that and things. And so people were playing around with that idea. So I took that notion combined with what Old Man Murray did with the Kingpin audio and decided that I was going to make an MP3 that consisted of the dialogue. I took all the dialogue files from Half-Life 1, loaded them into a Winamp playlist, and then opened up Windows Media Player and played Dark Side of the Moon while random clips from Half-Life 1 would play in a shuffle order. It's just absurd. So I got really, really familiar with these dialogue bits. So anyway, the film is just... Oh, the name for the project, by the way, it was Half-Life Pink Pin. I never did release it. Anyway, Ridiculous Ties. Just, this is so my kind of humor. It's so off the wall. It's so strange. It's so cartoonishly violent.
And creative.
And very creative.
How do you take, you get that mass of voices. How do you create a progressing story based on those and still have the humor to come up with lines that in the game were in one context, but in this movie are another context, which is funny?
Yeah. I'm very curious about the process, because the lines do so perfectly match their new context that, how do you plan for something like that? Okay, we got this scene where one of the scientists gets knocked down and falls down. What line are we going to have him say? Or was it a matter of, we've got this funny line where someone says, I believe I've been injured. And so, okay, now we need to construct a scene where that's used. And I don't know how. It takes a really strange mind, I think, to conceive of this and execute it.
Yes.
And it's executed very well. And it doesn't look like it's something that he has continued, unless I've missed something.
Too bad.
But, frankly, it may have just been such a ridiculous amount of work that it may have tired him out doing it, but just wonderfully done. There are hundreds of audio snippets from Half-Life 1 between the security guards and the scientists and them. Hundreds of files, each which is just a little phrase. So how they did this, it's really quite an achievement, and it's strange and funny. I thought sure that my son is college age, so I thought he would flip out over this. It's really hard to impress a Gen Zer, I have to say. I played this for him on the TV, and he's just like, oh, it's pretty good. So I don't know if he's just at that age where it's like, it's not cool to admit anything dad brings to him is cool.
Dad likes?
Yeah.
I think that's what that is.
That's my story, and I'm sticking with it, yeah.
You got to be numb to not laugh at this,
Yeah.
The way the filmmaker reinterprets Barney as this big, fat-bellied slob who's constantly eating.
What is this, a gun or something? And he points it in his mouth. Crazy.
It's just so funny. God, oh
Yeah.
God, that, and then Half-Life, the original Half-Life has this, you know, pixelated, unround faces that lends itself perfectly to comedy. Because the cartoon element of comedy is so excellent, the simplicity of that. So choosing, if you would have made this in Half-Life 2, it wouldn't have worked nearly as well as if in Half-Life 1. And of course, you don't have a source filmmaker for Half-Life 1, so you got to figure out a way to animate these characters, and so you transfer them to Blender, which takes quite a bit of moxie to be able to do that, and then animate them and then put them back in either green screen or actually within the scene. I'd love to talk to him about the technical challenges in this, but it's just so, there are certain films that within the first 10 seconds of watching it, you're immediately invested in it. Whereas other films take a while to sort of charm you into disbelief, or belief. And this film, it wasn't, as soon as I saw the first thing, I was like, oh my God, this is so smart. And there's an extra level of humor if you've played the game.
Yeah,
You know what I
lots
mean?
of rewards for someone who knows.
Lots of rewards for that, because I memorized that whole first thing. I know it backwards and forwards. And then to see his comments on that, it's just phenomenal. Well, my favorite film of the month. Just fantastic choice pick.
I couldn't help laughing all the way through it. And I think using the Half-Life 1 models is perfect for it, because if they'd used the Half-Life 2 models, it wouldn't have had the same thing, like you said, Ricky. Phil, you had a question about how they managed to pull it off. It's not a machinima series, but it was a YouTuber I used to follow. He knew Star Trek: The Next Generation incredibly well, and he would remix scenes from multiple episodes into these things where the characters were the complete opposites of what the characters in the show
I've
really
seen
are.
those.
Yeah,
I've seen them.
Yeah, and kind of like Captain Picard, he's a warmonger and things like that.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So people kept asking him how he was so good at it, and how he was able to produce so many. And I remember reading this from the comments. He said he had seen the show so many times, he knew the scenes so well, especially certain episodes he'd watched many times.
Right.
And that's how you are able to remix it, because well, I need this bit from this episode and this bit from over here, and this is obviously what this guy has done with his Half-Life videos. He knows that dialogue so well. He's able to think, I can make it work if I swap this around and do all of that, which shows an incredible dedication to, the game and to making this film. I can understand that must be a huge amount of work, and maybe that's why he hasn't done another one. But I really enjoyed this. It brought back a lot of memories of playing that first game.
Yeah.
Obviously,
yeah.
none of this actually happened in it, but it's a very different take.
Yeah.
And I kind of maybe wish this is what had happened in the game, because I was laughing. And it just starts off and you start, and then just goes to such an extreme that you don't expect it to go that far
Right,
when
right,
you
you
first
don't.
start it.
Yeah.
But it's not over the
There-
top. It's done perfectly. It's not.
Yeah.
It doesn't go too far. And yeah, I don't know what else
I
can
love
say
the
about
fact
this.
that this humor and story are subversive, which connects back to the original machinima community, which did many subversive reworkings of game-related stories and characters.
Yes.
And it's really great to see that sense of rebellion and subversiveness alive, especially through humor. And I think the first machinima community were at their best using humor as opposed to drama, because drama was harder to do. You had to get actors who could actually create emotional states, and that wasn't always possible with people who didn't have some sense of what acting was about. Whereas in humor, you don't need any of that. You know what I mean? So the subversive connection, I think, is just such a pleasure, and it gave me different levels of appreciation for what this filmmaker had created.
Well, what I loved about it, again, you've already said it, it's the guy's sense of humor. I mean, what a brilliant filmmaker this chap is, from his right from his comments on the description of the video to things like he said, I think I'm supposed to put tags on here or something. I don't know how YouTube works anymore. That just kind of really set you up for what you were for what you were going to watch. But actually, the whole of the edit of the film was in the same dry, witty style as the description on the first part of it. In actual fact, it's a meme inspired by El Toro 64 Russ's short, which is about the scientist's favorite and least favorite words, of which ridiculous ties is one. And then when I looked up ridiculous ties. There aren't really that many films about it. So the whole thing is actually a meme of Half-Life characters doing stupid things, I think. And of course, ridiculous ties in this, that's everything that you see is to do with a ridiculous use of a tie. So I think that's really what the theme of it is. I think it's pretty clear from his videos that he just enjoys making machinima, but he obviously knows quite a lot about Half-Life. And he's also, I mean, this is a style of humor that you rarely see carried off so well, I think. It's just, it really is just very well done. I think it's one of the funniest videos I've seen for such a long time. I think I started laughing pretty much right from the beginning, all the way through, right to the very end. I mean, that little sort of, scene where he was dodging one of the scientists right at the beginning, where he then did a sort of a spin and got away. I mean, that was just brilliantly well done. I mean, the continuous stream of jokes, which I mean, what can you say about them? I think they are set up primarily through timing delivery rather than anything specific that's said. I think the whole thing is about the timing of it, because there isn't anything that you can specifically pinpoint as being the ultimate ridiculous part of it.
Right. Yeah. Well, there's one moment in the middle where suddenly the whole nature of the background and the
black light
on the
paint.
guy's face,
the purple light, exactly,
which is quite arresting and quite weird.
That vaulted the level of strangeness for
it
sure.
It certainly did. Yeah, I mean, the ridiculousness of the scientist characters,
like a tribe.
Well, I thought they were. It was really intriguing, but there were some cracking lines in it.
Oh God!
And the one that made me laugh, I mean, the one that got me to start with was, do you know who ate all the donuts? I mean, that just got me going right at the beginning with this. That just was brilliant. And then the one that really made me laugh was I never thought I would see a highly trained professional, let alone create one. That's brilliant. That's so clever.
It's so absurd.
It's great. I could come out with that myself sometimes. And then right at the very end where he says, you repeat yourself sometimes. I thought the wit of that, the wit of it right the way through was just so well done. And the fact that it's using just the NPCs and their lines primarily that's
smart. So smart.
Very smart. You've got to ask how that was done, really. I mean, I wonder if, Phil, you were saying that, all the lines were extracted and then maybe stitched together to something. I wonder if that's how this one was actually done as well, where just the lines for this character were extracted and then something just formed from having a little look at how
I think it was more intentional than that.
I do too.
I think he's so, if you allow the fact that there were many other smart things that he did, I think you have to entertain the possibility that he deliberately organized, he went through the lines and chose the ones that he wanted to complete the narration.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes, exactly.
And the thing is that having a big background in theater, farce was one of the styles that you had to learn and you had to work on. And in farce, there are certain routines that were originally created in Italian pantomime, and they were called lazzi. And today we call them shtick. So comedians know certain shtick things, like the banana on the floor, the slippery floor, you slide out and you fall on your back. Even in 2024, if that's done correctly, we laugh because it's a shtick. Well, he's knowledgeable about comedy because he included many shtick pieces in the thing that are not original, but were used in such a a unique and strange way
Exactly.
in the midst of violence. You know what I mean?
Well,
So
like,
the analogy, go ahead.
yeah. Well, I was going to say the one that the part that sort of struck me was when you saw the escape scene and the movement of some of the characters when they sort of dropped onto their hands and they sort of galloped along like sort of zombies
Yeah,
together. I
yeah.
mean
Or
that's a kind
animals,
of a
yeah.
more modern shtick type thing, isn't it?
Uh-huh.
From more contemporary zombie films. I mean, there's
Yeah.
such a lot of weird
So he's
humor in it.
creatively combining classic shtick with modern subversive farce
Hmm.
and comedy in a way that is unique and original. When we talk about originality, oftentimes people go, "Oh, nothing is ever, you can never create anything new because we're only reusing." Well, I don't agree with that. We're not talking about absolutes. We're talking about creativity, which takes two different things and puts them together in a unique way. And that's what this filmmaker did. He took his own awareness and knowledge of humor and weirdness and used these elements, combining them with cliche and in a totally unique way. So in a way, this film is an original film,
Yes.
Yes.
unlike many other films, machinima films we see that are literally interpretations. In fact, I would argue that Still Seeing Breen is not as original as this film.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you. Here's a question though, and I was curious on this because this was a little weird, and maybe you've got some other thoughts about how this was done and why it was done. And it's the quality of the models used and how they were used in contrast or alongside different levels of pixelation. And it almost was a deliberate sort of, oh, I'll use this really strange, wide, pixelated sort of distorted image in the foreground and something else that looked a little bit different in its pixelation in the background, and yet the characters were the same kind of more rendered type quality. So he deliberately made some choices which I thought were a little bit I don't know, they were a little bit jangly against each other, I think. But actually in the end I thought, no, he's done this deliberately. This isn't just poor quality stuff that he's extracted and not rendered it out to the same level as everything else. These were deliberate choices he'd made. Um, and I think in the end, when I was sort of reflecting on it, I suspect because what he was actually doing wasn't so much taking the rise out of Half-Life. I think he was probably taking the rise out of the animation and the game experience in general, rather than anything specific to do with the game world or the role of these NPCs, just simply because of the way that it had been filmed. And I suspect that was also partly why that color filter may have been applied as well, because that was a really curious choice. It was sort of more like, I don't know, Five Nights at Freddy's kind of deep purple with all those kind of.
Well, he did edit it with DaVinci Resolve, which has a LUT color gradient. So he could have easily used color gradients, established color gradients that are given to you in DaVinci Resolve as part of how to color grade the background.
Yeah, well,
But that's a great observation. I missed that.
it was just one of those things that it was a little different. And added to the humor in many ways. It was just it was
Right.
just a laugh
Subtle.
festival. Very subtle, very well done. This is a very gifted person having made
Yeah.
this, I think. I mean, it's an
Phil-
absolutely brilliant choice, Phil. I loved it.
Yeah. Phil, do you have any ideas about that? About the difference between the background and the foreground?
No, the only thing that I can think of is that Blender almost in its default state is going to render better quality than what is shown here. So really I imagine it took quite a bit of effort to kind of tamp everything down to keep it looking in keeping with the low fidelity view of those models and Half-Life 1 and all that. Like Blender is such an incredibly powerful tool. It can do photorealistic stuff. So I imagine that must have been really quite the challenge to force it to
Simplify.
maybe not, yeah, to not not render things quite as nice as it can. I didn't really notice the pixelation difference that you're talking about. It didn't catch my eye, so I'm not sure how to comment on that. There may be points in this where there was some compositing going on. In other words, where the foreground characters are actually distinct from the background, and that might account for some of those differences. I think that the color change that happened when it went to like the blacklight thing, that could conceivably all be done within Blender without breaking a sweat. It can do that. But did he enhance this with some color grading in DaVinci Resolve? Almost certainly. Almost certainly. It's it would, because there's a consistency across those scenes that typically is the sign of, okay, somebody paid some careful attention to color grading. It's not impossible that this wasn't just straight out of Blender, but I have a feeling that he probably enhanced it with that.
I appreciate the fact that he didn't succumb to the temptation of using slapstick sound for bits, because you could have easily done it
to make it almost like a cartoon, right?
Yeah, but also those sounds were often used to cue the audience that this is funny. You know what I mean? You see them in Warner Brothers cartoons when they do that, or Roadrunner. He didn't succumb to any of that. So he kept the level of relative realism in the scenes, which I think adds to the humor, Although I would have liked to have heard a couple belches from Barney. Yeah, that's my chief criticism. No farting or belching from Barney. Yeah, the whole movie's flawed. I'm sorry. I take back my judgment. Kidding.
The pacing is what I keep coming back to.
Oh yeah.
It's just it's nonstop. I mean, not all of it is shooty, murderous action, but I mean, it drops you into something's happening and then it never stops. There's always something else happening that's relevant, that's attention getting. Whether it's something as simple as coffee being spilled or someone slipping in that puddle later, or just wonderful pacing.
Yeah. Go ahead, Damien.
I think in the past we've discussed comedy in some of the machinima films we've looked at, and getting the pacing right is very tricky when it comes to comedy, and that's one of the key parts of the delivery. Because if you get that pacing wrong, it doesn't work. And so you're right. The pacing in this is perfect.
I think for a beginner, trying to create comedy is a hard thing to do. I never really mastered it because I don't have an instinctive comic inclination. I can do it because I can recognize the rhythm and recreate the rhythm in line delivery and shtick and all of that. But I maintain that there are some people who instinctively, they have a gift for comedy. They instinctively know what that rhythm is.
Sorry.
That's okay. And I think this is one of the people who has that instinctive gift.
Yeah.
And you combine that with skill and craft and a creative mindset, and you have a fucking gem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So don't try this at home, kids.
Well, I think that wraps things up. Last week, I forgot to include our contact details. So if you have any comments on this film or us or anything else that we've been discussing either this week or last week, please send us an email at talk@completelymachinima.com, and you can check out our blog.
Paul Marino, I want to hear what you think of this film. Talk@completelymachinima.com.
Yeah. You can find the show notes and everything else on our website, completelymachinima.com. And that's it from myself, Damien Valentine, Phil Rice, Ricky Grove, and Tracy Harwood.
Bye.
All the best.
Bye-bye.
We'll see you next week.